Hello wrestling fans. Continuing on with 1991, here we go. November 18, 1991 Observer Newsletter. Death of Dick the Bruiser and bio. More. By Observer staff. One of the legendary characters in pro wrestling history, Dick the Bruiser, passed away Sunday night at his home in Indian Rocks Beach, Florida. At the age of 62. Bruiser had been weightlifting at his home and ruptured a blood vessel in his esophagus, and he died from the internal bleeding. After an autopsy on Monday, they found he was suffering from arteriosclerotic, a cardiovascular disease stemming from hardening of the arteries, which caused the blood vessel to rupture. The Bruiser, with his barrel chest, raspy voice and tough guy persona, was one of pro wrestling's biggest drawing cards dating from the late 1950s through the early 1980s. Born William Frederick Ophlis on June 27, 1929, which became Dick Ophlis, he was a legendary figure in the Indianapolis area, where he grew up, long before getting into pro wrestling. The subject of many stories, some, no doubt, heavily exaggerated, was known in his youth for being the toughest guy in town. Former pro football great Alex Karras, now an actor, devoted a chapter in one of his books to the legend of the Bruiser, saying how, when Dick was a teenager, merchants would close their shops when they saw Dick coming down the street, and everyone would steer clear of him. He was an offensive tackle at Jefferson High in Lafayette, Indiana, earning all-state honors as a senior. He bounced around something like 4 different colleges as a football player, but didn't last long before being kicked out of the different schools until winding up at the University of Nevada, Reno. As a sophomore at the University of Purdue in 1948, he was second-team All-Big Ten. After winding up in Reno, he was All-Pacific Coast first team as an offensive tackle in 1949 and 1950. During the offseason while in Reno, and later during the offseason while he was a pro football player, he worked as a bouncer at Harold's Club in Reno, and stories of him pounding on patrons became legendary tales. He was a 16th-round draft choice of the Green Bay Packers in 1951 and stayed with the team until 1954. At the time, the 5'11", 252-pound Bruiser was one of the heaviest and strongest players in the NFL. After being cut by the Packers in camp in 1955, he became a full-time pro wrestler, with a promotional story that he was kicked out by the NFL for being too rough. While it wasn't true, it at least made a good story to fit his heel image. He was an immediate hit in pro wrestling because of his power and roughness, gaining his first NWA World Title match against Lou Thesz as a rookie in Milwaukee. By 1957, he gained the United States Championship in Chicago's amphitheater from Wilbur Snyder, at a time when Chicago's wrestling from Marigold Arena was syndicated nationally, making him one of the nation's most well-known wrestlers and top-drawing heels. Right away, he had it, remembered Lou Thesz. He had the image and he lived the part. He believed he really was Dick the Bruiser. His reputation for being out of control was enhanced early in his career when he was involved in the biggest wrestling riot ever in Madison Square Garden in a 1957 tag team match with Dr. Jerry Graham against Argentina Rocca and Edouardo Carpentier, which led to numerous injuries to fans. Bruiser was banned for life by the state of New York, which, because of the riot, instituted a law that stayed in effect through the 1970s, that children under 14 were banned from attending matches at Madison Square Garden. Perhaps even better known was another riot he caused in 1963, which wasn't even in a wrestling arena. At the time, Karras, one of pro football's best-known linemen with the Detroit Lions, was suspended by Commissioner Pete Rozelle for gambling. Bruiser was the top heel working in Detroit, so a program was worked to build Karras up as a local hero babyface. In April of 1963, a match was scheduled between the two at Cobo Arena. A few days before the match, Bruiser showed up at a bar which was owned in part by Karras, that Karras frequented. As Karras recalled, at first he thought Bruiser was just trying to build up the gate for their match a few nights later by having a confrontation in public. But he soon realized Bruiser didn't know when to stop. Things got completely out of hand, and before the night was over, it was Riot City, with Bruiser, Karras, and several police officers, all winding up injured, and Bruiser spent some time in jail. The publicity was enormous, with the story of the brawl involving Karras being carried nationally, and it was page 1 locally. Johnny Doyle was the promoter at that time, recalled Thesz, who defended his NWA title on the same card in Detroit, and a few nights earlier in St. Louis had defended the title against Bruiser. Karras had called him, Doyle, the day before and asked him, "What do you want me to do?" So Doyle called Bruiser up and asked him what he was going to do, and Bruiser said, "I'm going to beat the shit out of him." Doyle then called up Karras and said, "Just do whatever you can." They did a number on each other. Alex ran out of gas and Dick didn't. When I got back from the dressing room after my match, Alex, who shared the dressing room with me, was still laying down on the rug. Dick was in the doctor's office getting stitched up. While the doctor was stitching up his eye, Dick was smoking a cigar screaming, "Hurry up, Doc, I got some broad waiting for me. Even though he was a huge drawing card, many promoters were afraid to use him because as the top heel of his era, he wasn't afraid to take fans' emotions past the breaking point and fighting his way back to the dressing room. As one promoter recalled, the other top heel at the time was Killer Kowalski, but Kowalski kept the match in the ring. Dick was always taking the match outside, using furniture, and he was involved in a lot of lawsuits. In the ring, Bruiser, nicknamed the world's most dangerous wrestler, headlined just about every major city in the country at one time or another. His 1967 match with Shohei Baba in Tokyo is still one of Japan's all-time most famous matches, and drew one of the highest TV ratings ever for a pro wrestling show. He held countless regional titles, his own World Wrestling Association World Heavyweight title based in Indianapolis on and off for decades, along with a few other versions of the World Heavyweight title. He also formed one of wrestling's most famous tag teams ever with the Crusher, Reggie Lasowski, and held the Old American Wrestling Alliance World Tag Team title with him numerous times from the mid-60s through mid-70s. Bruiser and Crusher drew numerous big crowds, particularly against heel tag teams like Harley Race and Larry Hennig, Mad Dog and Butcher Vachon and Nick Bockwinkel and Ray Stevens. One cage match against the Vacants at Comiskey Park in Chicago in 1970 drew nearly 30,000 fans. He was one of the first pro wrestlers to gain national media exposure with a huge story on him in the 60s in Sport magazine. In the early 1970s, he was involved in one of the most bitter promotional wars of the time with his Indianapolis-based WWA promoting regular houses shows in Detroit opposite the Sheik's NWA promotion, which got Dick blacklisted by NWA promoters for a few years. Bruiser's side eventually lost the promotional war, but when he finally threw in the towel, he and Sheik worked with each other on top and drew several sellouts at Cobo Arena. While his rowdy personality somewhat mellowed with age, even at the age of 50 he was involved in one of the most famous dressing room brawls of the late 1970s with the late Bruiser Brody in Peoria, Illinois. It stemmed from a payoff dispute from Indianapolis. Bruiser didn't have a good reputation as a payoff man as a promoter, which saw Bruiser get his head busted open against a locker. He continued to wrestle until he was long past his prime, but still packed them in as a main eventer as late as 1984, when he teamed with the Crusher and Blackjack Mulligan to draw a sellout 19,000 plus at Rosemont Horizon near Chicago against Jerry Blackwell and Ken Vatera and Sheik Adnan El-Kazi. Bruiser remained a top draw in Indianapolis, a city that he owned, and drew crowds of 10,000 plus as late as 1981 for a Mask vs. Loser Leaves Town match against the Masked Strangler, Guy Stomper Mitchell aka Jerry Valiant, and remained on top until the promotion's popularity dwindled and eventually became extinct. Even as late as 1982, he was the most popular wrestler in St. Louis, which at the time was known as the wrestling capital of North America. He headlined several sellout houses as a single that year, peaking by drawing a crowd of 19,027 for a match against Ric Flair. I only worked with him a few times back when I was in Minneapolis, American Wrestling Alliance territory, recalled superstar Billy Graham. But every time they brought him in, his name meant an automatic big gate. The Bruiser was one of the originators of not selling. Once he turned babyface for good in the late 60s, he rarely did jobs, except for the most blatant gimmick finishes. Perhaps the only exceptions to that rule would be an occasional clean job in St. Louis, generally in world title matches, where his good friend Sam Mushnick was promoter. Because of that, a lot of promoters wouldn't book him. Even to the end that was the case, as many will recall at last year's Starrcade when several heels charged the ring to lay out Sting and Bruiser, who refereed the main event, after the Sting vs. Black Scorpion cage match, but the Bruiser didn't sell. Even after he had taken savage beatings when police tried to quell his street fights, he'd never admit to really being hurt. His final appearance in a wrestling ring was a few months back when WCW promoted a show in St. Louis, and he worked as a special referee for a battle royal. Another death of a current wrestling personality occurred the previous Sunday, November 3rd, when El Gran Davis, probably the most famous wrestling referee in the world, passed away approximately 2 hours after officiating the main event at Arena Mexico in Mexico City between CMLL World Heavyweight Champion CN Cars vs. Conan. Davis, 51, whose real name was David Platino, was originally from Orizaba in Veracruz and was a former pro wrestler. Davis is believed to have died from a brain aneurysm. Since Davis had a problem with hypertension, it was originally believed he died of a heart attack, but the autopsy showed no problems with his heart. As heel referee for the MLL, with a black glove, Davis frequently was involved with spots which led to heels gaining the advantage on the top babyfaces, particularly Conan and Octagon. A few months back, he was involved in the controversial DQ finish in the Conan vs. Pero Aguayo mask vs. hair match at Arena Mexico, which saw Conan lost his mask. Davis was the only referee in the world to have gimmicks and t-shirts of himself merchandised by the promotion, and was as well known by the general public as most of Mexico's main event wrestlers. Ironically, on the MLL's television show that aired this weekend, the announcers made no mention of Davis's death, although the referees all wore black armbands during the show. All Japan announced its most ambitious pro wrestling promotion to date, the most extensive attempt at closed-circuiting pro wrestling ever in Japan. The December 6th show at Tokyo's Budokan Hall, which will be the finals of the annual tag team tournament, will be closed-circuited in 50 locations in 13 cities throughout Japan. While the old UWF closed-circuited some of its biggest shows in the past, including the Tokyo Egg Dome show, it ran anywhere from 3 to 15 locations. Pay-per-view technology doesn't exist in Japan. As a comparison, the first WrestleMania in 1985 was closed-circuiting by Titan Sports in approximately 130 locations in 2 countries. The lineup for the closed-circuit show will be Mitsuharu Misawa and Toshiaki Kawada vs. Steve Williams and Terry Gordy, Jumbo Tsuruta and Akira Tao vs. Stan Hansen and Danny Spivey, Giant Baba and Andre the Giant vs. Kimala 2 and Abdullah the Butcher, Kenta Kobashi and Tsuyoshi Kikuchi vs. Joel Deaton and Billy Black, Dan Crawford and Doug Furness vs. Dory Funk and Al Perez, Dynamite Kid and Johnny Smith vs. Sunny Beach and Johnny Ace, with more matches to be announced. Titan Sports has changed its pay-per-view card for December 3rd in San Antonio. We don't have details on the new card, other than one would assume the change in the card also means that there have been significant changes in the overall direction as far as the much speculated upon future course of the WWF title. The new lineup isn't available at press time, but should be pretty obvious after television tapings, which will include shows taped for November 30th, the only weekend. Hyping this card and the weekend after are held Monday through Wednesday of this week. Scheduled as the main event on the pay-per-view show, however, is a Hulk Hogan vs. Ric Flair match instead of the previously scheduled Hogan vs. Undertaker match. It's that time of the year when it comes to voting for the 11th Annual Wrestling Observer Pro Wrestling Awards. Here's a listing of the different awards to be voted on this year. Ballots won't be accepted until December 1st, and will be accepted through January 5, 1992. Our voting period covers anything that happens in wrestling between December 1st, 1990, and November 30th, 1991, and please keep all of these dates in mind. Category Awards. Pick a first, second and a third place finisher in each category, which will be given points on a 5-3-2 basis. Winner of the award will be decided upon by most total points. 1. Wrestler of the Year. This is for a combination of being an important and influential wrestler in a positive manner in the business over the past year combined with being a great performer inside the ring during the past year. Last year's top 3 were Ric Flair, Jushin Liger and Jumbo Tsuruta. 2. Most Outstanding Wrestler. This is based on ring work alone during the past year. Simply the 3 best in-ring performers of 1991. Last year's top 3 were Jushin Liger, Ric Flair, and Bobby Eaton. 3. Best Babyface. Based on drawing power and heat generated at the buildings. It is strictly a popularity contest based on drawing power, with ring work not a criterion. Last year's top 3 were Hulk Hogan, Akira Maeda, and Ultimate Warrior. 4. Best Heel. Again, based on drawing power primarily, and heat generated secondarily. Last year's top 3 were Ric Flair, A. Gilbert, and Ted DiBiase. 5. Feud of the Year. This should be based on a combination of having a compelling storyline or angle to the feud, having great matches on a consistent basis. A feud must be a series of matches, not a one-match series, and garnering interest at the box office. Last year's top 3 were Jumbo Tsuruta vs. Mitsuharu Misawa, Ric Flair vs. Sting and Chris, and Tony Adams vs. Steve Austin and Jeannie Clark. 6. Tag Team of the Year. For the best working team on a nightly basis over the past year. Last year's top 3 were the Shiner Brothers, the Midnight Express and the Rockers. 7. Most Improved. This is based on having made the biggest strides in ring work over the period of December 1st, 1990 through November 30th, 1991. Last year's top 3 were Kenta Kobashi, Ron Simmons, and Scott Steiner. 8. Most Unimproved. This is based on the biggest decline in work rate over the same period. Last year's top 3 were Sting, Samson Fuyuki, and Junkyard Dog. 9. Most Obnoxious. This is for the individual in the wrestling business, be it wrestler, announcer, promoter, or anyone else associated with the wrestling business that for whatever reason you don't like. 10. Best on Interviews. Who gave the best interviews on a regular basis in 1991? Last year's top 3 were Arnold Anderson, Jerry Lawler, and Jim Cornette. 11. Most Charismatic. What wrestler has to do the least to get the most out of it? Last year's top 3 were Hulk Hogan, Akira Maeda, and Ultimate Warrior. 12. Best Technical Wrestler, this is for having the ability to use a wide variety of technical wrestling maneuvers and execute them best to put on great matches. Last year's top 3 were Jushin Liger, Ric Flair, and Bobby Eaton. 13. Bruiser Brody Memorial Award, this is for the wrestler who uses brawling tactics to put together the best brawling style matches. Last year's top 3 were Stan Hansen, Atsushi Onita, and Terry Gordy. 14. Best Flying Wrestler, this is for the wrestler who does the most innovative and solidly executed flying maneuvers within the confines of putting together a good match. Last year's top 3 were Jushin Liger, Yoshihiro Asai, and Bobby Eaton. 15. Most Overrated Wrestler, the guy who gets the biggest push with the least amount of ability. Last year's top 3 were Ultimate Warrior, Sting, and Sid Vicious. Most Underrated Wrestler, the wrestler with the most ability who, for whatever reason, doesn't get a push commensurate with their talent. Last year's top 3 were Bobby Eaton, Ryan Pillman, and Brad Armstrong. 17. Best Promotion, it should be based primarily on which group puts together the best live product on a consistent basis and secondarily, the ability to sell that product at the box office. Last year's top 3 were All Japan, New Japan and the Japanese UWF. 18. Best Television Show, weekly television shows only are eligible. This is for consistent week-to-week shows, not for a specific episode of a show. Last year's top 3 were All Japan Pro Wrestling, New Japan Pro Wrestling and WWF Superstars of Wrestling. 19. Match of the Year, pick the best 3 matches in order that you saw that took place during the time period listed. Last year's top 3 matches were Jushin Liger vs Naoki Sano from Osaka, Jumbo Tsuruta vs Mitsuharu Misawa from Tokyo and Midnight Express vs Southern Boys from Baltimore. 20. Manager of the Year, pretty much self-explanatory. Last year's top 3 were Jim Cornette, Bobby Heenan, and Sensational Sherry. 21. Rookie of the Year, this is based on ring performance and not how someone is pushed. By our standards, a rookie is someone who hadn't had a full-time wrestling job with a company that runs regular shows prior to September 1, 1990. Last year's top 3 were Steve Austin, Koji Kiao, and Richard Slinger. 22. Best Television Announcer, last year's top 3 were Jim Ross, Tony Schiavone, and Vince McMahon. 23. Worst Wrestling Announcer, last year's top 3 were Herb Abrams, Gorilla Monsoon, and Ed Whalen. I want to quickly touch on this subject because it's been the subject of numerous phone calls since the situation with Magic Johnson went public. The subject is blading and the idea that bloodbath matches could lead to the spread of the HIV virus. I do know that of the thousands of reported cases of AIDS, not one case has been reported due to blading in a pro wrestling ring. Since I don't know the first thing about the subject or how the disease spreads, I don't want to make any comments regarding the subject other than if there is a reasonable risk that the disease can be transmitted in that way, then it would be a good thing for promotions to at least give HIV tests before continuing with bloodbath matches. But this is something those in charge of wrestling need to at least talk to experts on the disease about. Obviously we are dealing with a very serious disease. If the odds are astronomical against transmission in this way, ridiculous to get into a panic over it because, quite frankly, doing lots of driving can be dangerous as well, but I'd never suggest people give up driving because many people have died in highway accidents. But if the disease can easily be spread through bloodbath matches, then any promotion that has those type of matches needs to test or give up that kind of matches. Given the incubation time and all that, by the time we realize what has happened, it could already be way too late. EMLL. The November 8th show at Arena Mexico, which appeared to have drawn a crowd in the 17,000 range, in Mexico City aired this past Sunday on Galavision and in Mexico City, which is the first complete major live card on television in more than a month because of the yet-to-be-settled strike. Currently this group is in the midst of running a tournament to crown its World Trios champions. On the October 25th card at Arena Mexico, Atlantis and Angel Azteca and Super Astro beat Angel Blanco Jr. Elio del Angel Blanco, new son of Angel Blanco who just made his debut, and Medico Asesino Jr., Rayo de Jalisco Jr. and Justiciero and Apollo Dantes beat Gran Marcus Jr. and Herides and El Hijo del Gladiador Mississippi 1 and Satanico and Pirata Morgan. The New Infernales beat Black Magic, Norman Smiley, and Canadian Vampire Casanova and Mano Negra and Ringo and Casio Mendoza and Pero Arguello beat La Fiera and Sangre Chicana and Emilio Charles Jr. in tournament first round matches. In the only other match, Kyoko Inoue and Toshio Yamada and La Diabolica beat Lady Apache and Esther and Cynthia Moreno. On the November 1st show in the remainder of the first round of the tournament, saw the Dynamite Brothers, Cien Caras and Mascara Año 2000 and Universo 2000, beat Lismark and El Hijo de Lismark and Anibal Los Brazos beat Blue Demon Jr. and El Hijo del Santo and El Hijo de Solitario. Octagon and Conan and Dandy beat Vulcano and Tony Arce and Jerry Estrada and Pierroth Jr. and Fuerza Guerrera and Blue Panther beat Moger and Volador and Misterioso. Also Inoue and Yamada and Diabolica beat Esther and Cynthia Moreno and A10. So the November 8th card opened with all 8 remaining teams in the ring. Each team picked one member to enter a pinfall-only elimination battle royal, which would determine the quarterfinal pairings for the remainder of the card. Ringo Mendoza and Octagon were the first 2 eliminated, so their teams were to face off. Then came Jalisco and Satanico, Brazo de Oro and Caris, which left Pierroth Jr. and Atlantis to split the battle royal, and for their teams to meet in the main event. In the quarterfinals, Conan and Dandy, who has gained a lot of weight since he last appeared on TV, and Octagon beat the Mendoza brothers and Aguayo in 6:28 when Ringo had Octagon in a reverse cradle, but Conan came in and pinned Ringo. 3 stars. Then the new Infernales beat Justiciero and Jalisco and Dantes in 10:19 when Satanico pinned Justiciero with a powerbomb. The Infernales took a lot of good bumps here. 3 stars. Los Brazos beat the Dynamite Brothers when Brazo de Plata did a splash off the top rope onto all 3 brothers in 12:33. 1 1/2 star. The teams didn't work together very well, and the finale saw Atlantis and Astra and Azteca beat Guerrera and Pierroth and Panther in 1922 when Azteca made Pierroth submit. Guerrera took super bumps. This match started off trading good high spots and technical moves, but they kind of got lost a little past halfway through, which ruined what was one of the best TV matches of the year. 3 1/2 stars. The semifinals should be on television this coming weekend. Rival promoter Benjamin Mora wrote that Anibal, Blue Panther and Mano Negra will be losing their masks soon in his magazine. Mora frequently gives away MLL storylines because of his promotional rivalry with the group. Negro Casas made a rare appearance for this group on October 27 at Arena Coliseo in Mexico City, teaming with Estrada and MS1, losing to Atlantis and Sagrada and Pantrita del Ring. Current champions for this promotion include NWA World Light Heavyweight, Lismark, NWA World Middleweight, Atlantis, NWA World Welterweight, Fuerza Guerrera, CMLL World Heavyweight, CN Cars, CMLL World Light Heavyweight, Jerry Estrada, Mexican Heavyweight, El Egipcio, Mexican Light Heavyweight, Mascara Sagrada, Mexican Middleweight, Octagon, Mexican Welterweight, Ciclone Ramirez, Mexican Trios, the Dynamite Brothers, Mexican Tag Team, Tony Arce and Vulcano, Mexican Women's Neftali, Mexican Women's Tag Team, Irma Aguilar and Irma Gonzalez. UWA. Wrestler El Rebelde Blanco, real name Jesus Francisco Villarreal of Nuevo Laredo, was arrested and charged with the murder of Ida Elsa Solis of Laredo, Texas. The alleged murder took place on October 21 at the 26-year-old woman's house between 5 and 6 p.m. Villarreal was arrested jointly by the police of Laredo and the police of Reynosa in the Mexican state of Tamaulipas. The woman, who had 2 sons ages 2 and 3, died from more than 20 stab wounds with a knife. The TBS show National Geographic Explorer did a 20-minute segment on Lucha Libre on Sunday, basically describing the popularity of Lucha Libre as having something to do with the poor economic conditions in Mexico City. They did a segment on a wrestler called Super Barrio, who is not a big name, and wrestles mainly in outdoor parks against heel Tony the Landlord in trying to portray lucha as a morality play. There was also a brief segment on Vicky Aguilera, the 91-year-old lady who sits in the front row at the MLL Friday night cards, a guy they called Father Storm, Fray Tormenta, the wrestler who uses his wrestling earnings to support an orphanage that houses 90 kids, and talked quite a bit about the legend of El Santo, the most famous Mexican wrestler ever, who starred in 52 movies and the creation of El Hijo del Santo. There was a brief movie clip at the end of El Santo transforming his son into El Hijo del Santo, which has a rare shot of his son without the hood. There were very brief clips of Negro Casas wrestling against Tormenta, taking incredible bumps. According to the piece, nearly 1 million fans per year see wrestling at El Toreo alone, which may have been the case at one time, but certainly isn't nowadays, as that would be an average of nearly 20,000 per week. No doubt, however, that far more people attend live wrestling each year in Mexico City than in any other city in the world, for a wide variety of reasons, one of which is the cheaper ticket prices. They also showed a segment of young boys training to be wrestlers and said that the kids from the worst economic background generally turn out to be the best wrestlers. Los Villanos retained their UWA Trios title, beating the England and Dr. Wagner Jr. and Rambo on October 28 in Puebla. November 6 in Guanajuato saw Connect keep the UWA World Heavyweight title, beating Enrique Vieira, when Dos Caras no-showed. El Signo won the UWA World Light Heavyweight title from Viano 3 on October 31 in Mexico City. Rumor has it that the Killer will be turning on Connect shortly and they'll feud over the title. November 8th in Nezahualcóyotl was headlined by Caras and Canek and Villano 3 versus Ricky Santana and Miguelito Perez and Babyface, so Canek is back as a face again now that there are foreigners, Perez and Santana, in Mexico City. Negro Casas defended the UWA World Middleweight title against Solar I on November 7th in Mexico City. This past Sunday at El Torreo was headlined by Canek and Killer and Fishman versus Santana and Gigante Warrior, Butchmasters and Perez, Caras and Vieira and 3 versus Negro Navarro and Casas and Signo. Tamba, the former Flying Elephant, has returned to Mexico City. Robin Hood, real name Jose Alvarado, youngest of the wrestling Alvarado aka Brasso family, has challenged Casas for his title. A new wrestler debuted in Mexico called the Love Machine, who is billed as being from Portland, Oregon. No idea who he is. Chris Adams recently worked a show in Juarez. WWA World Champs, recognized mainly in Baja California and Chihuahua, are Heavyweight, Scorpio Light Heavyweight, Lizmark, Junior Light Heavyweight, Villano 4, Welterweight, Santo, Trios, Mercenaries, Tag Team, Silver King and Texano. UWA ratings as of November 1st, Heavyweight, Connect Champion, 1. Coquina, 2. Perez Jr., 3. Mil Mascaras, 4. Warrior, 5. Big Van Vader, 6. Tinieblas SR, 7. Buffalo Allen, 8. Scorpio 9. Samoan Savage 10. Dos Caras. Junior Heavyweight, Vieira Champion, 1. Wagner Jr. 2. Hurricane Castillo Jr. 3. Santana 4. Killer 5. Fishman 6. El Engendro 7. Cajos I 8. Fantasma 9. Shuel Guerrero 10. Tinieblas Jr. Light Heavyweight, Signo Champion 1. Rambo 2. Pegasus Kid, 3. Villano 3, 4. Owen Hart, 5. El Texano, 6. Villano V, 7. Villano I, 8. Babyface, 9. Navarro, 10. Black Power. Junior Light Heavyweight, Helgueo Champion, 1. Silver King, 2. Panther, 3. El Indomito, 4. Jose Luis Feliciano, 5. Falcon, 6. Ray Alcone, 7. Cajos 2, 8. Sagrada, 9. Celestial, 10. Mano Negra. Middleweight Casas Champion, 1. Solar I, 2. Ruben Garcia, 3. Jushin Liger, 4. Amigo Ultra, 5. Alcone 78, 6. Celestial, 7. Pimpinela Escarlata, 8. Super Raton, 9. Octagon, 10. Charles. Welterweight, Santo Champion, 1. Black Terry, 2. Guerrera, 3. Diablo, 4. Katana, 5. Cyclone Ramirez, 6. Volador, 7. Zeus, 8. El Matematico I, 9. Takeda, 10. Misterioso Tag Teams, Hamada and Aguayo Champions, 1. Black Power and Signo, 2. Silver King and Texano, 3. Perez and Castillo, 4. Samoan SWAT Team, 5. Villanos 4 and 5, 6. Indomito and Engendro, 7. Tinieblas Jr. and SR, 8. Mascaras and Dos Caras, 9. Arce and Vulcano, 10. Brasso de Oro and Brasso de Plata, Trios, Villanos Champions, 1. Warrior and Perez and Castillo, 2. Signo and Power and Navarro, 3. Canek and Killer and Fishman, 4. Mascaras and Tinieblas Jr. and SR, 5. Rudy Reyna and Escarlata and May Flowers, 6. Coquina and Samoan SWAT Team, 7. Mercenaries, Billy Anderson and Luis Piccoli and Tim Patterson, 8. Brazos, 9. Shuel Guerrero and Lobo Rubio and Elio del Diablo, 10. Cajos I and Cajos 2 and Ray Alcone. Zulima holds the World Women's title while Cutie Suzuki from Japan holds the Women's Junior title. Pegasus Kid holds the WWF Light Heavyweight title and Akiyoshi and Takayama won the newly created Intercontinental Tag Team title in a tournament on November 8 in Tokyo, beating Silver King and El Texano in the finals. All Japan. The tag team tournament opens on November 16 at Tokyo's Korakuen Hall with a television taping featuring Mitsuharu Misawa and Toshiaki Kawada vs. Stan Hansen and Danny Spivey, Jumbo Tsuruta and Akira Tao vs. Dynamite Kid and Johnny Smith, Giant Baba and Andre the Giant vs. Joel Deaton and Billy Black, Tena Kobashi and Tsuyoshi Kikuchi vs. Abdullah the Butcher and Kimala 2 and Terry Gordy and Steve Williams vs. Al Perez and Dory Funk. They'll be taping TV also on November 21 in Osaka with Tsuruta and Tao vs. Gordy and Williams, Misawa and Kawada vs. Kobashi and Kikuchi, Hansen and Spivey vs. Dan Crawford and Doug Furness. Baba and Andre vs. Rusher Kimura and Mighty Inoue and Kid and Smith vs. Abdullah and Kimala 2. Another taping will be November 29th with Masao and Kawada vs. Surita and Tao, Henson and Spivey vs. Baba and Andre, Gordy and Williams vs. Kobashi and Kikuchi, Kid and Smith vs. Crawford and Furnace and Butcher and Kimala vs. Johnny Ace and Sunny Beach. This group's last show on October 24th in Yokohama drew 4,900 fans in a 4,500-seat building with tickets selling out a day in advance, which was considered a great sign since Masawa, who is the promotion's top babyface, was still out of action with a broken nose. The heat was said to be super during the Tsuruta vs. Kawada main event. New Japan. A couple of title changed hands on the November 5th card at Tokyo's Budokan Hall, which drew a sellout 14,214 and approximately $680,000. In the top matches, Tatsumi Fujinami retained the IWGP World Heavyweight title, beating Masa Chono in 9:49 with the Dragon Sleeper. Riki Choshu kept the Greatest 18 Club World Martial Arts title, pinning Shinya Hashimoto with a lariat in 12:25. Hiroshi Hazi and Keiji Muto won the IWGP Tag Team titles, beating Rick Steiner and Scott Norton. Scott Steiner wasn't able to wrestle in a Japanese-style match yet. When Hazi pinned Steiner with the Northern Light suplex in 17:53, Norio Onaga regained the IWGP World Junior Heavyweight title, pinning Akira Nagami in 18:39. Jushin Liger pinned Madball Rex, Super Strong Machine and Hiro Saito beat Masanobu Kurisu and Kim Duke. Shiro Koshinaka and Kunyaki Kobayashi beat Osamu Kido and Kengo Kimura, and Black Cat beat Michiyoshi Obara. Antonio Inoki was there and did a sparring session in the ring. They announced the top 5 or 6 matches for the January 4th Tokyo Dome officially this past week, although they are all matches that have been listed here several times already. However, the card may have to be changed because on November 9th, during a 6-man tag team match on a spot show in Toto, Riki Choshu suffered a pretty serious neck injury and is expected out for 8 weeks, which makes the Dome show touch and go. Antonio Inoki did one of his unique angles on November 10th while giving a political speech at the college in Tokyo. While giving the speech, all of a sudden Kim Duke showed up, but instead of attacking Inoki, he brought out a piece of fax paper, which was a fax from Tiger Jeet Singh in Canada challenging Inoki to a match at the Dome. So Singh becomes the frontrunner for who Inoki will wrestle on the card. There had been talk of Inoki wrestling either Dory Funk, Nick Bockwinkel or Harley Race on that show. November 9th in Toto drew a sellout 1,730 as Hazi and Muto and Choshu beat Norton and Rex and the Hot Shot. I've got no idea who he is, but he's not doing very well. Fujinami and Nagami beat Onaga and Machine. Hashimoto and Kimura beat Kido and Masa Saito. Liger and Chono beat Hiro Saito and Bad News Allen. Duke and Kurisu beat Koshinaka and Kobayashi. Obara pinned Mike Lozinski and Black Cat pinned Scorpio. November 10th in Koriyama drew a sellout 1,660 as Hazi and Chono and Fujinami beat Machine and Allen and Norton when Fujinami pinned Allen. Muto and Koshinaka beat Rex and Kurisu. Kimura and Masa Saito beat Hazi and Kobayashi. Nagami and Liger beat Hiro Saito and Onaga. Kido pinned Hot Shot and Scorpio pinned Lozinski. On November 11th, Muto and Hazi lost a televised non-title match to Norton and Hashimoto, with Hazi doing the job, and after the match Hazi challenged the two to a title match. November 7th in Inatsu drew 2,470 as Muto and Choshu and Fujinami beat Duke and Kurisu and Norton. Onaga and Machine beat Nagami and Hazi. Hashimoto and Masa Saito beat Rex and Allen. Chono pinned Hot Shot. Liger and Koshinaka beat Scorpio and Lozinski and Kurisu pinned Hiro Saito. November 4th at Tokyo's Korakuen Hall before a sellout 2,000 saw Hashimoto and Muto and Chono beat Rex and Norton and Hot Shot. Nagami and Hazi beat Hiro Saito and Machine. Masa Saito and Choshu and Fujinami beat Duke and Kurisu and Allen. Liger pinned Lozinski and Koshinaka, and Kimura beat Masashi Aoyagi and Kantaro Hoshino. Next tour will be December 5th to December 16th with Scott Norton, Bam Bam Bigelow, Tim Horner, Brad Reingens, Frank Anderson, Tom Zenk, and Tony Halme. They also have Korakuen Hall booked on November 23rd with Muto and Hashimoto and Chono vs. Onaga and Hiro Saito and Machine on top with young guys underneath. The move where Liger gave Chris Benoit the Frankensteiner from the top rope started with Liger standing on the middle rope like he was going to do a superplex and Benoit sitting on the top turnbuckle, but instead Liger did a Frankensteiner from that position. TV has been preempted for golf coverage for several weeks, so for the first time ever, none of the tag team tournament will appear on television. The December 16th show from Osaka will be televised live to make up for it. SWS. Results from October 28 saw Genichiro Tenryu pin Haku with a powerbomb. Naoki Sano made Akira Katayama submit in a junior heavyweight tournament match. Bestia Salvaje pinned Masao Orihara, and the Powers of Pain Warlord and Barbarian beat George and Shunji Takano, and Takashi Ishikawa and Ashura Hara beat Yoshiaki Yatsu and Shinichi Nakano in the top matches. October 29 saw Tenryu pin Yatsu with a powerbomb, Yoshihiro Asai pin Salvaje, Pat Tanaka and Paul Kato Diamond beat Sano and Orihara when Diamond pinned Orihara, Kitahara pinned Akira Katayama in a tournament match, Hara pinned Warlord and George Takano pinned Barbarian. October 30 saw Tenryu pin George Takano with the powerbomb, Kabuki pinned Tanaka, Barbarian pinned Kendo Nagasaki, Haku pinned Ishikawa, Nakano and Yatsu beat Hara and Fuyuki and Asai, Edouardo beat Salvaje and Orihara. November 8 in Hakodate drew 3,050. Keep in mind most SWS tickets are still freebies, although they were able to legitimately sell out Korakuen Hall on October 3 and the hardcore Tokyo fans were almost as enthused for this group as they are for other promotions, unlike in the past where the Tokyo fans used to catcall the whole night because of the quality of the SWS matches. As Tenryu pinned Kerry Von Erich in 9-11 with a lariat, Nakano and Haku and Yatsu beat Fuyuki and Ishikawa and Hara, Rick Martel pinned Sano, Rockers beat Kenichi Uya and George Takano, Kitahara and Emilio Charles Jr. beat Asai, Orihara when Charles pinned Orihara, Nagasaki and Goro Tsurumi beat Fumihiro Niikura and Shunji Takano and Akira Katayama and Kabuki beat Hiroshi Hatanaka and Apollo Sugawara. November 10 in Sapporo drew 5,100 as Tenryu pinned Hara in 15:19 and after the match, Yatsu and Haku both attacked the beaten Hara and challenged him to pick any partner for a tag team match at the Tokyo Dome. Since Tenryu will be facing Hulk Hogan in the main event, Yatsu and Haku beat Rockers in 15:32 when Haku pinned Marty Jannetty. Martel pinned George Takano, Kitahara and Fuyuki and Ishikawa beat Nakano and Sano and Kabuki via DQ and after the match Kitahara attacked Fuyuki to set up a feud between the two of them. Von Erich pinned Nagasaki, Asai pinned Charles and Oya and Shunji Takano beat Nakano and Goro Tsurumi. The next show is December 12 at the Tokyo Egg Dome called Super Wrestle, a combined show with SWS, WWF, PWF Ande MLL. The only matches announced thus far are Hogan vs Tenryu, Legion of Doom vs Natural Disasters, Yatsu and Haku vs Hara and mystery partner, Yoshiaki Fujiwara vs Ishinriki and the finals of the WWF Junior Heavyweight Tournament. On the poster for the show are Hogan, Fujiwara, Yatsu, Sano Load, George Takano, Masakatsu Funaki, Asai, and Tenryu. FMW. Going into the tag team tournament, Atsushi Onita at press time was in a panic because Dick the Bruiser was the intermediary in his booking Leon Spinks. Bruiser was supposed to supply 4 American pro boxers to form 2 separate tag teams for the tournament, and with Bruiser out of the picture, Onita at press time had no way to contact Spinks and set everything up. Bruiser also sent Calypso Jim for the tour, and Spinks teaming with a guy named Rufus Blackburn for the tour. Onita met with Mexican promoter Benjamin Mora, WWA in Mexico, and wants to set up a title which both groups recognize and the champion defends in both countries. FMW ran a show on November 4 as part of a college festival in Tokyo drawing 3,500 fans as Ricky Fuji and Tarzan Goto beat Onita and Ganusuk in the main event. Tournament opens November 20th with the Mercenaries, Billy Anderson and Louis Piccoli versus Fuji and Samba Asako, the Gladiator, Mike Awesome, and Big Titan, don't know who he is, but he's from Calgary, versus Tarzan Goto and Atsushi Onita, the Sheik and Sabu versus Mark Starr and Horace Boulder and others. The tournament final is December 9th at Tokyo Bay NK Hall, which also includes Megumi Kudo versus Gundarenko Terechikova, a 380-pound Soviet woman who is a world champion in judo, Miwa Sato versus JWP's Reiko Hoshino, formerly the Scorpion, for the WWA women's title, and a weird tag team match in which Amigo Ultra teams with the midgets Pandita Chiquito against Pandita and the midget Ultra Mancito. Other Japan news. UWFI drew a near sellout 6,200 in Osaka on November 7 to see Nobuhiko Takada defeat Bob Backlund in 1642 with an armlock submission. Kazuo Yamazaki beat Billy Scott in 2017 with a knee-lock submission. Gary Albright beat Tatsuo Nakano in 656 with a sleeper, and Yoji Angio and Tom Burton beat Kiyoshi Tamura and Shigeo Miyato. Interest in UWFI has picked up of late because of Backlund working shows and Tamura becoming a big name in Tokyo because of how much he's improved of late. In fact, the October 6th card in Tokyo's Korakuen Hall sold out the hall just 15 minutes after tickets went on sale. Universal opened its tour on November 7th at Tokyo's Korakuen Hall, drawing a crowd announced as 1,850, in reality about 1,100, as Monkey Magic Wakita and Kendo and Gran Hamada drew with Masa Michinoku and Punish and Crush, Akiyoshi and Takayama in Mexico, in an encore 1,500 hours match after the scheduled card was over. Asai worked this show through an agreement between promoter Hisatsune Shinma and Tenryu because they were saying they already had sold a lot of tickets based on Asai's name, and wanted to at least use him for the first show so they wouldn't have to have massive refunds. in the semifinals of the tournament to crown the new UWA Intercontinental Tag Team Champions. Silver King and El Texano beat Huracan Jr. and Leo Del Santo, and Punish and Crush beat Rambo and El Engendro. Also Asai and Kendo beat Scorpio Jr. and Emilio Charles Jr., Dr. Wagner Jr. and Blue Demon Jr. and El Sismo and Canelo Casas beat Michinoku and El Mathematico I and Wakita and Hamada. November 8th, in the same building, Drew and announced 1,700 as Kato Kung Lee 2 won a battle royal. E2 is actually Kendo. Punish and Crush beat Silver King and Texano to win the IC Tag Team titles. Wagner and Rambo and Engendro beat Hamada and Wakita and Michinoku. Demon and Casas beat Huracan and Santo. Lightning Kid won a prelim, and Sismo and Scorpio 2 beat Kendo and Mathematico. Kid is there from Minnesota, billed as GWF Light Heavyweight Champion along with Bruce Kreitzman, billed as a GWF referee. November 9th, in Maebashi, Drew and announced 1,200 as Hamada and Texano and King beat Wagner and Rambo and Engendro. Santo and Punish and Crush beat Scorpio 2 and Sismo and Wakita. Casas and Demon and Michinoku beat Mathematico and Huracan Jr. and Kendo. Lightning Kid beat a Green Boy Wing, which is said to be having financial problems, and rumor has it that it may split into two groups, one concentrating on FMW Bloody Brawling style and another concentrating on Lucha Libre style. Runs its final tour November 27th through December 7th with Gypsy Joe, TNT to Headhunters, Eddie Gilbert, Tom Pritchard, The Iceman, Ricky Santana, Great Wojo, Dragon Master, Gary Rich, Texas Hangman, one of whom is now working as Bull Payne in GWF, and the original TNT. Mil Mascaras makes his first appearance in Japan since the mid-80s on a Wing show on December 10th in Tokyo's Korakuen Hall. Rings card announced for December 7th at the Ariake Coliseum in Tokyo includes Akira Maeda vs. Wakhan, Samba wrestler from Greece, Chris Dolman, former world champion in Samba, vs. Tiger Lavani, Greece, and Willie Peters, Netherlands, vs. Grom Zaza, Soviet Union. Harley Saito pinned Dynamite Kansai on November 2nd at Korakuen Hall to keep the UWA Intercontinental Women's title for JWP. PWF ran November 3rd as Fujiwara went to a 30-0-0 draw with Minoru Suzuki. Masakatsu Funaki knocked out Dwayne Kozlowski, former U.S. Olympian. Wayne Shamrock, who is this group's top star, destroyed Kazuo Takahashi. Bart Vale made Yusuke Fuchs submit, and Jerry Flynn beat Wellington Wilkins Jr. via the 5 knockdown rule. USWA. A few title changes to report over the past week. On November 4th in Memphis, Doug Masters and Bart Sawyer won the USWA Tag Team titles, beating Jeff Jarrett and Robert Fuller. And also Tom Pritchard won the Southern title from Eric Embry. However, Embry regained the title at the television tapings on November 9th in Memphis. Complete November 4th results saw Tony Anthony beat Leatherface, Billy Travis beat Bill Dundee via DQ, Jimmy Valiant beat Dog of War, Masters and Sawyer beat Jarrett and Fuller to win the tag titles, Pritchard beat Embry to win the Southern, Lawler beat Jeff Gaylord via DQ to keep the USWA title, and Jarrett won a Redmond Royal Battle Royal Rumble rules. They began what appears to be a Jarrett turn on television Saturday. Jarrett did an interview saying that he and Fuller agreed that they'd team up until they got beat. Of course, during that period they lost several times, but let's not confuse the issue and try and make sense, and since they've gotten beat, it's time to break up the team. He said it's time for him to move on and go after the Southern title and the world title, and then started talking about Lawler, saying that he idolized Lawler when he was growing up, but now it's his turn. They did a top 10 contenders and Jarrett's name wasn't on the list, and he said he'd have to work his way up through the top 10 to the title, and he was starting with a singles match against Tony Anthony, a face. Then, in a TV match against the Scorpion, Jarrett pulled out a chain and used it to win. Later in the show, Lawler talked about Jarrett and compared the situation with himself and Jackie Fargo about 17 years ago, but that he wouldn't make the mistake Fargo did in not taking the young guy seriously enough. Fuller did an interview and said he's been trying to talk to Jarrett all week, but that Jeff wouldn't talk with him, and that he invited him to come down to a bar and meet during the week, and Jeff didn't show up. Embry regained the Southern title, beating Pritchard when driver Tony Falk interfered. Dog of War is history, leaving no doubt over money. The Freezer Thompson push is history, since he did another job on television this week teaming with Anthony against Masters and Sawyer. Nate the Rat is back as a manager and came out saying he was bringing in a new wrestler called the Grave Digger. Now, what's that a takeoff from? Nate was even doing a little bit of a Paul Bearer imitation. Nate brought out 3 rats with him and made the remark that the biggest rat is named Vincent, which is probably saying something. Gravedigger will be coming in a few weeks, and I believe it'll be Joe DeQuisto, who wrestled as Roadblock most recently for SWS. He's big, but really bad, but Lawler does have a talent in working with people like that and carrying them to watchable matches. All these new things seem to smack of Lawler being the booker once again, although I don't know that is the case. Yanni Davis has left for GWF. Lawler in his interview also called the Mid-South Coliseum the house that the King built, and mentioned he'd sold the building out more times than either Elvis or the Beatles, which may actually be true, although he's sure a lot more chances to do so. November 11th in Memphis had Travis vs. Thompson, Pritchard vs. Tony, Jarrett vs. Anthony, Masters and Sawyer defending against Fuller and Valiant, Embry defends the Southern title against Kimala and Lawler, and Dundee vs. Jeff Gaylord, and the masked guy who headlined 2 weeks back that they were hinting was Snowman, but I believe it was really a guy called the Big O who pops up every now and then. Gaylord and the masked guy are called the Super Team and wearing Superman outfits, and Lawler said that he grew up drawing pictures of Superman and resented guys like that wearing his outfit. Oregon. Steve Dahl and the Grappler won the Pacific Northwest Tag Team titles, beating Ron and Don Harris on November 10th in Vancouver, Washington at a pizza parlor. No lie. November 9th in Portland saw the crowd pass the 1,000 mark, but that was also because kids were free, as Dahl and Grappler beat the Harris brothers via DQ in a Northwest Tag Team title match when ref C.W. Bergstrom was bumped. The Harris brothers pulled out chains and used them, then poured syrup and feathers all over Dahl and Grappler. John Rambo beat Mike Miller via an over-the-top rope DQ. Something humorous happened here, with Don Owen doing the ring announcing and announcing Miller as being from somewhere or other, but not Louisiana. Miller then puts his arm around Owen. Owen hates Miller because he testified against Owen in a meeting of the State Athletic Commission several years back, and said to Don, "We've known each other for a lot of years and you know I'm from Louisiana, baby." So Don, with a disgusted look on his face, goes in that monotone voice goes, "And from Louisiana, baby, Mike Miller." The Harris brothers did an interview saying they wouldn't be giving Dahl and Grappler any more title shots, but Don Owen came out and said they were going to have to on November 23rd. Bergstrom then challenged one of the Harris brothers to a match which ended with the other brother throwing a chain in the ring to Bergstrom, who caught it, and was caught using it by ref Sandy Barr and DQ'd. Then came the Fiesta Garden and Mike Winner came out to challenge Madrill to a match for next week. The rules are that both men will be tied up in the ropes and there is a pair of scissors placed in the ring, so the first man free can use the scissors to cut the other's hair. Bergstrom then came out with scissors. Winner then held Madrill, who cut Bergstrom's chest hair last week, but before Bergstrom could cut Madrill's hair, Madrill gave Winner a low blow, knocked down Bergstrom and cut more out of the back of Winner's hair. They also announced the November 16th show would have kids free, mainly because the WWF has Hogan vs. Flair in Portland on November 14th. So Owen promoted with kids free the week before and the week after. The main event was Billy Jack Haynes vs. Demolition Crush in a coal miner's glove match. Haynes worked on Crush's shoulder for most of the match, with Crush selling it big like it was injured. Haynes got the glove and knocked out ref Sandy Barr with it. I swear Barr must take more bumps than half the wrestlers in the WWF. Before he could use the glove on Crush, Crush back suplexed him. Crush got the glove and hit Haynes with it and put on the full Nelson. However, with his shoulder injured, he couldn't put enough pressure on the hold before everyone ran in. Don Owen then suspended Haynes for hitting Barr, however Crush begged Don to unsuspend him, so Don said Haynes was suspended until November 23rd, at which time he and Crush can meet again. The final match saw Jesse Barr beat Madrill via DQ. Brickhouse Brown debuts as a face next week. Don called him a star for Ted Turner's wrestling for the past 8 years. Also on November 10th in Vancouver, Washington, besides Dahl and Grappler winning the tag titles, saw Winner beat Madrill via DQ, Dahl beat Ron Harris via DQ, Don Harris pinned Grappler and Barr pinned Rambo. Global. Booker Bill Eadie is definitely gone, stemming from the financial crunch. Joe Pedicino and Craig Johnson are the only ones working in the front office, as Louise Manning, who ran the office, is also gone, although story has it she'll be brought back when the ad money comes in. Expect Eddie Gilbert to start handling the booking when he gets back from Japan, although that's only speculation, not fact. Max Andrews, since he's going to have to fund the group out of television ad revenue, will be turned babyface over the next few weeks with some kind of a storyline that he was all along doing an undercover sting operation to rid Global of the cartel. The Patriot and Scotty Anthony appear to be among the few wrestlers who will be flown in for the television tapings, and the rest of the wrestlers will be those who are willing to drive in from Dallas. The November 18th house show in Marietta has been cancelled as well, nor are there any plans to run house shows in the future. November 8th at the Dallas Sportatorium drew 700 as the first taping. For December 2nd, ESPN saw Brian Lee beat Mike Stetson, Bull Payne beat Terry Daniels, Black Bart and Rattlesnake beat Dogs of War, Mike and Butch Blackheart, and Bill Irwin beat Rod Price. Lee then beat Sweet Daddy Falcone in a dark match, and Tom Davis drew Terry Garvin in a dark match. The next taping, November 30th syndication, December 3rd ESPN, saw Sam Houston beat Payne via DQ when Samantha interfered, and Tug Taylor beat Mike Davis via DQ when Tom Davis interfered. The next taping was for ESPN on December 9th, which saw Rattlesnake beat Stephen Dane via DQ, Davis brothers beat Rick Guerin and Larry Green, Gary Young beat Buster Blackheart and John Tatum, and Price beat Bart and Irwin when Price pinned Irwin. November 15th has Taylor and Garvin vs. Davis brothers, Tatum and Price vs. Bart and Rattlesnake, Houston vs. Payne, Barry Horowitz vs. Daniels, and Danny Davis debuts and Brickhouse Brown appears. Expect Big Bully Bizic to return after things didn't work out with Titan. Horowitz is going to be given some sort of a gimmick based on losing. November 29th will be a Thanksgiving special with Patriot vs. Anthony, Steve Simpson and Chris Walker defending the GWF Tag Team titles against Tatum and Price, Taylor and Garvin vs. Davis brothers in a cage match, and Gary Young vs. Horowitz. Here and there. Boris Malenko's UWF drew 200 fans on November 7th in Tampa as Billy Freedom drew with the Viper in the main event. Peach State Wrestling has a show on November 20th in Marietta, Georgia with Jim Cornette and Stan Lane vs. Ranger Ross and Junkyard Dog on top, plus Paul Orndorff, Night Stalker managed by Ox Baker, the Blazers, and the dream match of all time, Ronnie Gossett vs. Jimmy Powell. Iqua on November 7th in Tampa drew 200 as Ron Slinker pinned Caribbean Bad Boy 1-star Ricky Johnson, managed by Rocky Johnson, beat Pat Tanaka, managed by Sonny King, by a countout when Tanaka and King broke up, so Tanaka wound up as a babyface out of the whole deal dud. Dick Slater pinned Bugsy McGraw 1-star, Kevin Sullivan pinned Kenny Kendall in a brawl all over the building 3.5 stars. Tanaka pinned Jimmy Backlund to win what was billed as the World Light Heavyweight title 2.75 stars. The Terminator and Master Blaster DDQ Long Riders, Tex Selinger aka Dennis Knight and Billy Mack, to keep the Florida Tag Team titles 1.25 stars. They announced as heading to this group will be Bam Bam Bigelow, One Man Gang, Ron Bass, Lou Perez, Ivan Koloff, Steve Williams, Joe and Dean Malenko, and Hurricane Walker. We'll see who makes it. LPWA taping is confirmed for December 1st in Jackson, Tennessee. Joel Goodhart is looking at promoting 5 shows per month on the west coast of Florida. John Arezzi's Pro Wrestling Spotlight show on WGBB didn't run on November 3rd because of financial problems, did on November 10th. But right now it's on a week-to-week basis. Herb Abrams is working on taking over the time slot from Arezzi. Gordon Scozzari is claiming to have a 3-hour television taping on December 16th at Long Island University with a tournament to crown an American Wrestling Federation champion. First round is scheduled to have Nikita Koloff, managed by Eddie Gilbert, versus Coco Ware, Paul Orndorff versus Adrian Street, Gilbert versus Sunny Beach, Ron Garvin versus Bob Orton and Stan Lane, with Jim Cornette versus Danny Spivey. Supposedly the announcers for the show will be John Arezzi, Chris Cruz, Angelo Poffo, and Terry Funk. December 15th in Asbury Park, New Jersey is scheduled to have Jeff Gaylord and Beach versus Gilbert and Tony Anthony, Orton versus Sampson, Dutch Mantell versus Mike Sharp, 2 collegiate wrestling matches, Steve Williams versus Spivey, Orndorff versus Koloff, and The Sheik and Sabu versus Garvin, and Lane plus Hercules Ayala. Former wrestling announcer Ken Resnick is now doing the ring announcing for the American Gladiators road shows. CWF on November 9th in Tampa drew 200 as Al Perez beat Jerry Flynn in the main event. Kevin Sullivan will work for this group on December 7th against Tommy Starr. Fox Network did a 2-minute segment on Mark Coraluzzo, the 10-year-old son of WWA promoter Dennis Coraluzzo, as the world's youngest ring announcer. EQ on November 10th in Somerville, New Jersey saw Joe Savoldi beat Pat Tanaka and Coco Ware beat Tony Atlas via countout. November 9th in Southington, Connecticut saw Savoldi beat Tasmaniac via DQ and Ware pinned Tanaka. November 9th in Caguas, Puerto Rico saw Herb Gonzalez beat El Corsario, TNT beat Jimmy the Giant, Bronco No. 1 and Invader No. 1 kept the WWC Tag Team titles beating the Heartbreakers, Frankie Lancaster and Wendell Cooley, Carlitos Colon kept the WWC title beating Manny Fernandez via DQ, Hurricane Castillo Jr. kept the Puerto Rican title beating Ray Gonzalez via countout, Fidel Sierra pinned Hector Guerrero and Galan Mendoza, and Randy Rhodes beat Sweet Brown Sugar, Skip Young, and Supermedico No. 3. Uwo drew 375 on October 27th in Anderson, South Carolina with Ranger Ross, Bill Mulkey DDQ Buddy Landell, Junkyard Dog beat Nikita Koloff via DQ, and Wahoo McDaniel beat Ivan Koloff in a strap match. IWA Championship Wrestling on December 7th in Hamburg, Pennsylvania has Jimmy Deo versus Samson in the main event. South Atlantic Pro Wrestling drew 75 fans on November 9th in Coolumee, North Carolina. The main event was billed as Chris Chavez versus Manny Fernandez, but Chavez left for WWF and Fernandez was with WWC, so the main event instead saw Tommy Angel beat Stormtrooper Helmet. The Ringlords were there in singles working as Rick Slagle and Speedy Gonzalez, while Gary Royal also worked the show. Wade Keller's latest Pro Wrestling Torch annual features interesting interviews with Bill Watts, Roy Shire, Lou Thez, Jerry Lawler and Bruno Sammartino plus other features. The interviews are great, particularly Watts talking about how Lester Maddox had the right ideas in race relations. Poor Jim Herd would be lynched for saying anything half as racist, but since Watts is everybody's favorite wrestling promoter, and he was a great promoter during his heyday, no doubt about it, he can do no wrong I suppose. Well, he would run a better wrestling company than Herd. John Muse compiled a list of all the 4-star and better matches he's seen, or have been reported over the past year in The Observer. The promotions in order with the most 4-star matches over the past year he's seen were All Japan and All Japan Women tied for first, followed by New Japan, WWF and WCW. Wrestlers who had worked the most 4-star matches during the year through August were 1. Kenta Kobashi, 2. Mitsuharu Misawa and Jumbo Tsuruta, 4. Toshiaki Kawada, 5. Bull Nakano, 6. Masafuchi Tsuyoshi Kikuchi, Akira Hokuto, Asia Kong, and Bison Kimura. The American with the most was Steve Williams, although the one with the most based on matches in the United States alone were Cactus Jack, A. Gilbert, and Shawn Michaels. WCW. Highlights of the television taping on November 11th at Center Stage in Atlanta before 800 fans saw Mark Bagwell get another tryout and he got a good reception. As part of this coming Saturday's TBS show, Dustin Rhodes did an interview and Arnold Anderson came out. They were both hinting Barry Windham would be there as his partner or it would be a mystery partner. The rumor was going around of WCW employees that Rhodes' partner at the Clash would be Rick Steamboat, although that wasn't confirmed at press time. They had a 2-on-3 match with Brian Pillman and Mike Graham versus Johnny B. Bad and Teddy Long and Diamond Stud, ending with Long doing the job. He seems to be getting phased out in a good match. Rick Steiner pinned Oz, Big Van Vader and Steve Austin beat PN News and Tom Zenk when Austin pinned News in a good match. Rick Rude pinned Steve Armstrong. This airs before the Young Pistols win the U.S. Tag Team titles as heels will air in a pretty good match, and Rude and Paul E. Dangerously did an interview where Dangerously went nuts, plus Sting pinned Thomas Rich, and Sting did an interview with Medusa coming out and telling Sting that it would be a cold day in hell before he'd get his stinger near here, whatever that is supposed to mean. They also taped other matches for future television shows, including Rhodes pinning Bobby Eaton in a good match with Eaton announced as the newest member of the Dangerous Alliance and after the match Enforcers, and Eaton left Rhodes laying until Pillman and Graham made the save. News and Zenk beat Stud and Bad when Bad was pinned by Zenk, and after the match Stud and Dallas Page beat up on Bad. Long wasn't even there. Then to complete Bad's monthly turn, it is time to babyface. News wrestled Stud with Stud getting the pin when Page interfered, then Bad came out and told the ref about it, and it ended up with Bad and News shaking hands. Rhetorical question of the week. How come when Bad debuted, he had no clue as to what to do in the ring, and he was pushed like crazy and beat everyone? Then when he improves 1000% and gets over really strong, and learns to play his gimmick second to none, he gets buried while instead they push Van Hammer like he's the second coming, who is 5 times worse in every way and not over 1/10 as much. The November 6th card at the Forum in Los Angeles drew a $14,000 house, so the paid attendance was just under 1,000. World Championship Wrestling did a 3.1 rating on November 2nd, which ties its best of 1991, while Main Event did a 2.4 and Power Hour did a 1.7. Expect Teddy Long not to be the only manager phased down and or out. Lady Blossom seems to be on her way, and it seems that's not the end of the list. Nearly everyone is saying that Jerry Jarrett will be coming into work as co-booker with Dusty Rhodes in 1992, but best sources tell us that is far from a done deal, although Jarrett has talked with TBS about things. Most cable sources indicate that with all the replay showings that the Havoc pay-per-view show did in 0.8 buy rate, which would mean a gross of about $2.33 million. Buy rate would be the lowest of any WCW pay-per-view show except the Tokyo Dome card on tape delay, which had virtually no hype involved with it. Best guess is that Windham will be out until at least February of 1992. Tony Schiavone starts this weekend on Main Event with Missy Hyatt. There is talk of adding a 6th pay-per-view show in 1992. Starrcade will consist of a drawing to determine 10 tag team matches. The drawing will take place at the beginning of the show, so you won't know any of the matches on the card until you purchase the show, and the 10 winning teams will then go into a 20-man 2-ring battle royal. The idea is for this to become an annual concept for Starrcade, as WCW wants to do exclusively themed shows on pay-per-view at the same time WWF is adding title match main events to its themed shows. Ron Simmons expected back around December 1st. Windham's legit injury occurred in a tag team match using the Bulldog finish that aired over this past weekend on Worldwide Wrestling. Mr. Hughes working against main event talent, Rick Steiner in particular, with his sunglasses on and with those glasses not breaking exposes the business worse than almost anything. Jushin Liger will be appearing on an interview segment at probably the November 19th Clash, or if not, the pay-per-view. This makes perfect use of his talent, since he knows only a little English. The spot will be done with Missy Hyatt for comedy purposes. If he's going to be at the Clash, wouldn't it make sense to give him a sensational TV win so that his house show appearances will mean something and that he could have a match with Pillman at the pay-per-view that would mean something? The Sting vs. Cactus Jack submission or surrender match that took place on this past weekend's worldwide show was the best match I've seen on American television since, well, at the very least the Ric Flair-Brian Pillman matches from both 1990 and 1991, and maybe even going back farther than that to the Flair-Terry Funk I Quit match in 1989. I gave it 4¼ stars. November 8th in San Jose drew 1,000 as Pillman and Eaton beat Oz and Stud in 1400 hours when Pillman pinned Oz with a flying body press 1¼ stars. Hammer pinned Terrence Taylor in 11:30. The first 4:30 consisted of one arm drag, hip lock, punch and body slam, and then it got worse. Whenever you feel like life isn't being fair to you, just think if you were Terry Taylor. Taylor tried to wet nurse him through this match, but after 5 o'clock of stalling to carry him, it fell apart. 2¾ stars. Mr. Hughes pinned Big Josh in 6:11 1/2 star. Austin drew Rhodes in 14:06 2½ stars. Sting pinned Jack in 8:54 in what was advertised as a cage match, but the cage no-showed, which was just as well because Jack is a lot better when he has more room to operate. 3½ stars. Steiner's beat Enforcers via DQ in 11:06. Rick worked almost the entire match. Scott did one Frankensteiner at the finish and not much else. When Anderson hit Scott with the belt after Scott hit his move on Zbyszko, 2½ stars, and Luger pinned Kazmayer in 10:30 when Harley Race distracted Kaz and Luger clotheslined him from behind him. Luger really tried to find the answer of how to make a match with Kaz, but found out there was no answer. 1 star. November 10th at the Met Center in Minneapolis drew 800 as Pillman pinned Stud. Bill Kazmayer pinned Oz in one of the worst matches of all time. Hammer pinned Terrence Taylor. Abdullah the Butcher pinned Eaton. Rhodes double countout with Austin. Lex Luger pinned Zenk with Nick Bockwinkel as special referee. Steiner's beat Enforcers via DQ and Sting beat Cactus Jack. November 9th in Chicago drew 1,200 as Kazmayer and Pillman beat Stud and Oz. Hammer pinned Taylor. Abdullah pinned Eaton. Austin drew Rhodes in the best match on the card, which was a bloodbath. Mr. Hughes pinned Big Josh. Sting pinned Jack and Luger pinned Zenk. WWF. Lots of new things stemming from the first of a 3 nights worth of television tapings on November 11th in front of a full house of 5,000 fans in Utica, New York. These matches were taped mainly for either Primetime Wrestling or for the pre-Survivor Series Primetime Wrestling special. Chris Chavez worked a dark match, although he's already in. Chris Walker got a tryout and was said to have looked good. The Mountie worked a squash, then challenged anyone in the house, and Sergeant Slaughter came out to a big pop. I'm not sure about this, but my guess is that this wasn't taped. Why confuse Mountie's issue with Bret Hart, but was done to make sure Slaughter got the correct reaction later in the show when he was introduced as replacing the injured Jim Neidhart for SS. Even as late as the previous night in Boston, when they announced Slaughter for the next card, the crowd booed his name. Ted DiBiase regained the $1 million belt from Virgil in a 2½ stars match when Repo Man, Barry Darsow, hit Virgil with the belt while Sherry distracted the ref. So after this airs, DiBiase will work with El Matador for the belt while Virgil will work with Repo Man, instead of Skinner. Roddy Piper pinned Hercules 3/4 star. Earthquake and Big Boss Man had a singles match which went 2:42 before they simply signaled for the match to stop. Because of a technical problem either backstage or in the ring, because they brought them both out a few minutes later to try again. They debuted a 7-foot-tall Cajun giant, who was absolutely the worst. Ric Flair brought out Mr. Perfect as his new manager. Perfect will be called Flair's technical advisor, and Bobby Heenan, who won't be going on the road anymore, will be Flair's executive consultant. Jim Cornette was offered the spot as Flair's manager but turned it down. Earthquake DDQ Bossman 3/4 star when Typhoon, Jake Roberts and IRS all jumped him and Legion of Doom made the save. Bushwhacker Luke pinned Blake Beverly. Mike Enos, Undertaker pinned British Bulldog when he was hit with the earned 2½ stars. Bossman beat Warlord via DQ when Harvey Whippleman interfered. Matador pinned Skinner 1 star. Jake Roberts beat Randy Savage via DQ in 4:41 1½ star. DiBiase, with the belt, pinned Greg Valentine. Bulldog double countout Mountie 3/4 star. Legion of Doom DDQ Natural Disasters 1 star, and Piper beat Flair via DQ in 10:42. 2½ stars. O.D. Wilson, one of the world's strongest men and the 1988 World Powerlifting Champion in the super heavyweight category, who was considering an offer to join the WWF and had a meeting with the Titan brass scheduled in the near future, died on October 29 at the age of 36. At 6'5" and 400 pounds, Wilson had suffered numerous injuries while lifting heavy weights. Just a few weeks back, he squatted 2 reps in training with 1,000 pounds and competing in strongman contests. No word at press time on whether or not the death was steroid-related. November 10 in Boston, Drew 7,000 as Matador pinned Cato 2 stars, Bulldog Drew Mountie 1 3/4 stars, IRS pinned Bossman 2.5 stars, Flair pinned Piper 2.5 stars, Jim Powers pinned Rex Armstrong dud, Colonel Mustafa pinned Valentine dud, and Legion of Doom beat Natural Disasters via DQ 1 3/4 stars. Next show with most of the crew in Honolulu for the Aloha Stadium show the same day, as Undertaker and Roberts vs. Savage in Duggan, Hart vs. Mountie, IRS vs. Bossman and Beverly Brothers, and The Genius vs. Jimmy Snuka and Bushwhackers. Big Bully Bizich has quit. The gimmick just didn't work. No word on who is replacing him at Survivors. It was funny in Utica at the taping they were still doing the Reinstate Savage hype for the latest TV matches even though the fans had already seen Savage wrestle on that card. And they talk about not wanting to confuse their audience. All-American Wrestling on November 3 did a 2.6 rating, which is up from the past few weeks. However, the bad news is Prime Time on November 4 set an all-time record low, drawing a 1.9 rating, which is the lowest rating for any pro wrestling show in prime time, of this format or any other, in the history of the USA Network. I was surprised that they mentioned Slick's leaving so prominently to become an evangelist. Slick, real name Ken Johnson, was a preacher in Fort Worth, Texas when he was discovered by Bruiser Brody and Buck Robley. It's so unlike WWF to mention and talk about someone who is gone, which I guess means they expect him back. Did you catch just how much of a squash Kerry Von Erich did for Undertaker on Challenge? At least they know how to get a heel title challenger over strong. Can you believe not only do they keep calling Undertaker undefeated, despite the fact he lost almost every house show match all summer long, but now they're also calling Berserker undefeated, and he's dropped numerous house show matches as well. November 9 in Cincinnati, Drew 6,000 as Matador pinned Cato 1 star, Mustafa pinned Valentine dud, Bulldog Drew Mountie 1 star, Berserker pinned Powers 1 star, Bossman pinned IRS 2 stars, Bossman really worked hard, Legion of Doom beat Disasters via DQ dud, lots of missed moves, and Hulk Hogan beat Flair via countout with the same finish from Denver 2 3/4 stars. Flair worked hard, but it didn't really matter because few noticed. As one person described it, it was like watching pearls among swine. Hogan's work was poor. November 9 in Louisville saw Chavez pin Skinner, DiBiase beat Virgil via countout, Undertaker pinned Duggan, Savage pinned Roberts, Snuka pinned Bizich, Beverly Brothers beat Bushwhackers, and Bret Hart pinned Warlord. The readers' pages. Dale Gagner of 502 2nd Avenue SW, Grand Rapids, Minnesota 55744 can help anyone promoting pro wrestling with tickets, posters, advertisement developments or programs. Dan Goza of P.O. Box 156, Torbay, Newfoundland A0A3Z0 Canada is looking for a regular supplier of All Japan Women videotapes, a black 4 Horsemen baseball hat and tapes of localized interviews for the Flair vs. Hogan matches in Los Angeles and Oakland. Lori Young of 2051 S. Calle Mesa del Oso of Tucson, Arizona 85748 is looking for tapes of matches and interviews of Doug Gilbert before 1990. She can trade tapes from EQ, Sapwo, Lucha Libre or IWF in exchange. John Hoven of 1375 Chaffee CT, Ontario, California 91762 is looking for tapes of the October 18th Jushin Liger vs. Chris Benoit match and copies of the October 6th All Japan and SWS television shows and a regular supplier of Japanese tapes. William Leishman of 1120 N Placentia #C26, Fullerton, California 92631 is looking for Wrestling Observer yearbooks and Pro Wrestling Torch yearbooks. Fred Rosen of 1406 Cicely Drive, North Merrick, New York 11566 has tapes of David Letterman shows with Fred Blassie and Andy Kaufman as guests and will trade them with anyone interested. Ken Bonaparte of Route 1 Box 251, Ellery, South Carolina 29047 is looking to trade for tapes of the recent New Japan singles and tag team tournaments and the Muta vs. Fujinami match. AIDS. The dramatic news of Magic Johnson brings one question to my thoughts. How long will it be until a wrestling notable is publicly linked with the AIDS virus? Wrestlers have a well-earned reputation for being promiscuous. Drug use isn't uncommon and the steroid needle seems to be a way of life for a contemporary wrestler. Mere words cannot describe the total disgust I have felt in learning of the re-emergence of Jose Gonzalez into the current U.S. small circuits. I tolerated and ignored this subhuman slug while he stayed in Puerto Rico. But he recently worked a show in Chicago and appears to be a prominent part of South Atlantic pro wrestling. Videos on that TV show have featured Gonzalez in his invader guise. It seems almost a sure bet that he will appear in Japan for Wings with Victor Quiñones. I, for one, will never support in any way, shape or form, any promotion that employs him. Clon. Satellite Beach, Florida. With the horrifying revelation that Magic Johnson contracted the HIV virus, the preliminary to AIDS, I turned toward wrestling in this country. The AIDS plague doesn't know skin, color, age, race, or creed. In the wrestling profession, it doesn't know the difference between a star and a jobber. In all the ruckus over steroid use, we've forgotten about another time bomb ticking away at the profession. Dr. Jeff Levin wrote in the November 9, 1987 Observer that the mixing of blood and ring rat sex puts the guys into a risk situation. What's already been done can't be changed. Nobody knows if anyone from the 1980s will wind up getting HIV or AIDS. But steps can be taken to prevent this generation from being at the same risk. 1. Outlaw blading completely. Everyone should stop this yesterday. Not just in the United States, but in Japan as well. Promoters like Joel Goodhart and Atsushi Onita have to realize that the long-term health risks outweigh the short-term financial rewards of drawing the percentage of the audience that thirsts for blood. It'll mean sacrificing successful formulas that have served them and others like them well, but will it be worth the price in human lives down the road if they turn a blind eye to it? 2. Mandatory AIDS testing for wrestlers. Heaven forbid I should get some civil libertarian's nose out of joint, they who piously preach illegal search and seizure and cower behind the Constitution. Why have people find out if they're infected or if some doctor has it and passes it on when you can pull a Vince McMahon and pretend the problem doesn't exist? Arguments against testing are indefensible in this day and age and smack of supreme ignorance and out of touch with reality. 3. Guys who live fast and loose should remember that isn't 20 years ago anymore, and they should seriously examine their behavior. Magic's tragedy was a wake-up call not just for dopes who think it can't happen to me, but for a profession with a far higher risk of AIDS than any other legitimate athlete except for perhaps boxers. This business can stick its head in the sand, like most of America did, and it can practice denial for as long as it chooses. But sooner or later, it will come down on it like a tidal wave. Paul Hanlon Jr. Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Halloween Havoc. Even though the show was better than the Great American Bash and also better than I expected, it's still only an in-between show. It was an improvement to have Cactus Jack in the cage match, but the cage match was still basically stupid. Most people watching probably didn't understand the concept, and for kids watching, the match was in poor taste. The introduction of Rick Rude achieved the purpose of establishing him as a top heel, but why use Z-Man as cannon fodder? In Chicago and other cities in November, he's going against Luger for the title in the main event. This match wipes out any drawing power that match might have had. Dangerously's return came off well, but why did Jim Ross make those comments? He sort of was saying that he knows only hardcore fans actually were watching the show, and if that's the case, why do we have to put up with Oz and Van Hammer? This kind of sums out what the show was all about. For everything they do well, there is another thing that they don't. Mark Schultz. Chicago, Illinois. Thumbs up. If heavy metal doesn't win the most embarrassing wrestler award, I'll eat an issue of The Observer with no condiments. On the plus side, Dustin Rhodes proved he's one of the best young workers in America today. Brian Pillman and Steve Austin are the future of WCW. Hopefully Jim Herd, Jack Petrick and Ted Turner won't screw them up as well. It was also nice to see Scott Steiner return. Bill Strong. Bristol, Connecticut. On Sunday, I had the choice between having 7 teeth pulled without Novocaine or viewing Halloween Havoc. Either way, it was 3 hours of agony and I'd be left with a bad taste in my mouth. Thumbs down doesn't even begin to spell it out. Let's look at some of the problems with this show. Oz sucks. What was the Chamber of Horrors match? It made no sense. How can someone not even sell an electrocution? That light heavyweight title sure came off as important. Refer eye camera, spelled like something illegal, showed what Nick Patrick was really look at during 3 counts. Lady Blossom had more TV time than Steve Austin. Tony Schiavone was announcing. The world champion lost a fall in less than 5 minutes. Mr. Hughes couldn't be at ringside because he didn't have a manager's license. Did Michael Hayes have one? And if that's the case, why is he allowed at ringside in every other match? Jim Ross said Van Hammer's fans are known as hammerheads. They would have to be. Austin vs. Rhodes was the best match. Paul E. stole the show. Rick Rude's new music stinks, but not as bad as Van Hammer's slingshot suplex. Paul McGee. Buffalo, New York. Halloween Havoc wasn't as bad as everyone anticipated. The Chamber of Horrors had some good brawling, but the ending was bad. Pillman vs. Morton was pretty good. Enforcers vs. Patriots needed an angle. The main event was too short, but it was nice to see a clean pin in the third fall. The introduction of Rude and the return of Dangerously stole the show, giving it a 5.5 on a 1 to 10 scale. I attended the October 28 Madison Square Garden show. The Ric Flair vs. Roddy Piper match was 4 stars. But I may not attend the November 30th cards because of the security guards. They were harassing me and my friends because my camera had a zoom lens. We were also harassed for chanting Tito sucks. Quite a few people were chanting it. But the security put an end to that really quick. After Maldonado. Corona, New York. I'm getting a tape of Havoc since only about half the subscribers in my cable company have full pay-per-view capability. Havoc was made available only in some areas because Paragon Cable of Manhattan didn't consider it a major pay-per-view like Survivor Series. The Bash only had 830 buys out of a 150,000 home universe. 0.55%. I talked briefly with Joel Goodhart, who asked me how I liked the September 21st show. I told him I liked what I could see of it. Joel seems sincerely to be responsive to fans' complaints and suggestions, unlike Herb Abrams. I'll also go to my second WWF show in a row on November 30th to see Flair vs. Hogan. At the October 28th card, the crowd was mostly pro-Piper. I gave their match 3 3/4 stars. It was a good fast-paced action-packed match but a little too short with a silly ending. But that's the WWF. Eddie Goldman. New York, Australia. I'm writing in response to the name withheld letter in the October 7th Observer. Let me preface my comments by saying I also disagree with Ken Dunlop's comments regarding the IWA Tour of Australia. I thought the shows were tremendously entertaining. The reason I'm writing is to make a comparison of the Ken Dunlop that I've known for 4 years and the Ken Dunlop described in that issue. Ken is a man who cares deeply for the business. Over the past few years, Ken and Wayne Pickford have trained and developed all the young workers who wrestle here. When the IWA Tour was confirmed, Dunlop made inquiries with a variety of media outlets hoping someone would want to do a story that would generate enough interest to produce a match pitting he and Pickford against 2 of Rob Roussen's better workers. For anyone to be stupid enough to not be able to see through that defies belief. Maybe there was a degree of venom in the current affairs story, however local fans who have been Dunlop and Pickford in action know the comments weren't without substance. It would also be remiss of me not to correct some bogus information Sal Corrente was given by Larry O'Day while out here. To say that the Wonderland matches were sanctioned by the Australian Wrestling Federation is like saying a show is sanctioned by the American Wrestling Alliance. It simply no longer exists. I'm not even sure that it ever did. To call the promotion Dunlop works for an outlaw group is laughable when one considers the group Dunlop wrestles and books for puts on more than double the number of shows that Ron Miller, the other local wrestling promoter, puts on. The wrestler O'Day recommended to the IWA, Steve Hardy, was simply a case of O'Day doing an old mate a favor. He isn't among the best wrestlers in Australia. Craig Napper. New South Wales, Australia. Flair vs. Hogan. The October 25th show at the Oakland Coliseum was the worst show I've ever seen in person. Little heat and little wrestling skill. The WWF is ruining Ric Flair by teaming him with Bobby Heenan. Hulk's comeback has gotten old, too. The foreign object finish was fine, but the title reversal should have occurred after intermission with a raging Flair going on the house mic about it to build up the rematch. Lawrence Fan. San Jose, California. The WWF show last Friday was an even bigger ripoff than usual for me, since I didn't arrive until midway through Hogan Flair. Not that it appeared to be anything special, heat-wise or otherwise. By the way, I believe this was the first time I've seen Flair wrestle live. It's sort of like seeing John Lee Hooker for the first time as the warm-up act for Motley Crue. Herb Mushnick. Berkeley, California. I think the Hogan Flair crowd in Denver November 4th was good for a Monday night. I'd give the match 2.5 stars, but only because it was so much better than everything else on the card. There was nothing else on the card even worth watching. Bossman vs. IRS was decent, but everything else was a dud. Add to this fact, there were only 6 matches and that ticket prices were raised and you have an overall bad card. I've seen Flair wrestle in 13 states and the District of Columbia, and I think he looks really out of place in the WWF. It's been 11 months since I've been to a live WWF show, and it will probably be another lengthy period of time because I go to another. However, I hope Flair makes a ton of money and gets his due recognition. The Chattanooga pay-per-view show was super live. The Chamber of Horrors wasn't that bad live, even though the concept was completely stupid. Instead of watching Paul E. during his interview, I watched the reactions of WCW employees who were standing in front of the backstage curtain. A couple of them didn't look too happy about his steering committee comment. Scott Anthony and Eddie Gilbert have been hilarious on ESPN. It's funny every time they bring up whether the bad side of Nashville is near Hendersonville. Why does Jim Ross give more inside information on his 900 hotline than Steve Beverly? Gary Vanasek. Greeley, Colorado. I went to the Los Angeles Sports Arena for the Flair-Hogan match. It drew a smaller crowd than I expected, but it was raining, and you know how Los Angelians are about going out of the house when it's raining. The crowd was about 70% pro-Hogan, but the minority for Flair were very vocal. Obviously, from Flair's television interviews this week, they are basically telling us he has no chance at all of winning the title. The questions the fans were asking at the matches mostly consisted of whatever happened to the Ultimate Warrior and Mr. Perfect. Why doesn't Titan at least acknowledge injuries to its wrestlers? It would add legitimacy because a lot of the fans believe that nobody ever gets hurt wrestling. Mike Reiner. Sepulveda, California. Hogan. I taped about 4 hours of different feeds of Hulk Hogan on my satellite dish promoting his movie from different TV stations around the country. He spoke many times about steroids. His statements were all very repetitious and scripted. I believe one of the reasons he's pushing wrestling as entertainment instead of sport is because nobody tries to make Sylvester Stallone pass a steroid test, and he's trying to say wrestlers are actors and not athletes. What about the rumor of the Ultimate Warrior, Hercules, and Mr. Perfect having HIV? Is there anything to support this claim? Is Professor Toru Tanaka Pat Tanaka's father? Are they related in any way? Is Toru Tanaka still alive? I've got a running bet with the Rosati sisters on this one. Cheryl Vasquez. Poquag, New York. DM. The rumors about Warrior made the rounds, probably stemming from the article in the tabloid magazine about him having a male lover, but as far as I know, there is no truth to that HIV story about any of them. Pat Tanaka and Toru Tanaka aren't related. Pat's father was a wrestler named Duke Tanaka who worked under the name Duke Kyomaka as a 1950s Japanese villain. Duke passed away a few months ago. Toru Tanaka is still alive and works as an actor in Hollywood and is on TV and has bit movie parts fairly often. Although Pat, Duke and Toru all worked as Japanese heels, all are of Hawaiian ancestry, as is Mr. Fuji and Tojo Yamamoto. Hogan has never tried to say wrestlers weren't athletes. He's tried to emphasize that they are both actors and athletes.